I am Polly Leonard, the founder and editor of Selvedge magazine, and welcome this seventh in our series of Tea and Textile Talks. Hi, Wafa.
Hey, how are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
I'm good.
I'm just telling our readers that this is the seventh in our series of Tea and Textile Talks. Every second Friday, I finish work early and enjoy a cup of tea with either someone we featured in the magazine or someone we're partnering with. And this afternoon, we have the great pleasure to welcome Wafa Ghnaim, who is going to talk to us about all things Palestinian embroidery. I'm just going to adjust my screen very slightly.
Yeah, me too. I need to adjust my screen too.
A bit better. Okay. So we featured Palestinian embroidery in issue number 1 and in issue number 90. If anyone listening would like to continue their own research, there are articles there for your delight and pleasure. So, Wafa, your story starts with the Nakba, the catastrophe in 1948, in which 700,000, which seems an incredible number, of Palestinian Arabs were forced to flee their homelands to refugee camps in neighboring states. Your mother, Farrell, was one of those refugees, I guess as a small baby. I don't know how old she was when she escaped from the violence. I'm curious to know a little bit about her journey that started in Palestine and ended, or is not yet to end, with her becoming the first Palestinian woman to be awarded the National Endowment for the Arts National Heritage Fellowship. Wonderful. By the United States government. Can you tell me a little bit about that incredible journey?
Yeah, so as you said, my mother was born in northern Palestine in a village called Safed. It's part of the Upper Galilee. And it's like Galilee is kind of the region, and there's the upper and the lower. My mom was in Safed, so the very tip top there of Palestine. And at 3 years old, she was exiled with her family. And they were exiled to Syria. And, my grandfather was the minister of education, or in the Ministry of Education of Palestine. And so he, when he was able to rejoin the family in Syria, was able to basically find gainful employment and he was really proud that he didn't have to stay in the refugee camps. So they were pretty lucky. And she grew up in Syria, and, of course, Damascus and Jordan, or Amman, is only just a few hours apart. So it's kind of like me driving to New York from Washington, D.C., or like driving to Seattle, Washington from Portland, Oregon, or something like that. It's not like a huge... So she would, go back and forth, and she worked for many years in Syria, but then she also worked for many years in Jordan. She ended up meeting my father in Jordan. Mm-hmm. And my father's from Wafa originally, but was also, his family was... in Jordan, and they got married and they immigrated to the United States. And that's kind of where she had me, and I have 2 sisters. One's older, one's younger, and they, just stayed and, built their lives. And my mother sort of almost immediately, I should say, began teaching embroidery, Palestinian embroidery. So I would say probably the year before I was born, so 1982-ish or something like that, she had sort of begun having a more formal capacity to teach embroidery. And she, she never put me and my sisters like in any sort of childcare or anything. She always really took pride in having us with her all the time. So me and my sisters always sat behind her. She always had like a packet with different activities for each of us because we're 3 years apart. So everyone was doing something different. And we would sit there and just, while she was teaching or demonstrating, you know, work on our projects. So I grew up in my mother's classroom on Palestinian embroidery, and she was really the only person, you know, at the time, there really wasn't any sort of way to build a community beyond like her local space. So there really wasn't a lot of this teaching of embroidery. It's always been very secretive, like in our culture, because we're under occupation, we're dispossessed, dislocated, displaced. So we tend to really hold on to our traditions. But in this case, we have many, you know, in my work today, we have many Palestinians and allies who want to learn the art form so to keep it alive and so to support the preservation of our culture.
I've been reading your book, which I'm enjoying very much. Show our readers. It's Wafa's book is a combination between a personal memoir, but also an exploration of Palestinian embroidery. And there are lots of patterns and diagrams. And it's a really good read. And in the book, your mother describes embroidery as her passport, as her connection to her Palestinian identity and her homeland. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I think the piece specifically you're talking about, that's called My National ID. Let me tell it. So first of all, for those people who don't know or don't have my book, this is my national ID. It's basically a necklace. And inside the necklace, there's this sort of pouch. Inside the pouch is a folded up thobe. It's a traditional Palestinian dress, which we'll talk about more specifically in a moment. So my mother made a small thobe, folded it up in a very careful manner, and put it into the necklace, the pouch of the necklace. And pouches in Palestinian culture and sort of in the Arab world is like an amulet. You know, it's kind of there's a long time tradition for amulets. It's a really ancient, actually, symbol for many cultures and function for many cultures.
But it's almost Wafa like an identity card, like you'd have in an office.
Yes, exactly, like a badge almost. But then also there's that sort of play on the amulet being hung like kind of around the neck, and so there's this healing there. There's an insinuation of healing. So my mother, when she immigrated to the United States, they asked her where she was born, and she said Palestine. And they said, well, we can put Israel. We don't have a way to identify Palestine in the system or whatever. Yeah. And so even though a portion of Palestine, like originally East Jerusalem, Gaza, the occupied territories, technically is not Israel, so there should have really been a way. I don't know what was happening in the 80s at that time, but they wouldn't let her indicate where she was from. So she said Jordan, because she would rather put Jordan than her occupier's name, you know? So that was real, that was excruciatingly painful for her to be further dispossessed of even being able to say or to identify in her immigration documentation that she was Palestinian. And that dispossession really, you know, that further dispossession really, really impacted her, and also the way she viewed the United States, the way she viewed her role in the United States as always being ultimately an unidentified foreigner or like an alien. And that feeling is kind of, so what she's saying with My National ID is she's sort of reclaiming that. Thank you for bringing that up, by the way. Yeah.
The embroidery is a way to connect to her history. I'm assuming that the challenges of maintaining the traditional throughout the diaspora are many and various. And I know that your mother passed on her skills, not only through her teaching, but to you and your sisters through an apprenticeship. Can you tell me a little bit about the teaching that she's done and the way that she taught you sitting within the home in an environment where perhaps, or a similar environment that she would have learned embroidery from her mother?
Yeah, so the apprenticeship program through the Oregon Folklife Network ran from, I think, 1993 to 1995. That particular, every state, every area has a kind of folk art, traditional art apprenticeship programs around the country, around the United States at least. And I'm sure there's iterations of that internationally through arts councils and arts funding. Those 2 years was, I guess, that is like a formal apprenticeship program, but I want to say that, you know, she really spent her life mentoring us in the art form, and she still does today. So anytime I have questions, anytime I'm teaching a class and I feel like, oh, I need to, you know, I can't speak on this, I actually don't have a lot of experience in this area, I bring in my mother to teach the students and to teach me. And so the apprenticeship program was more like a capstone. It helped us define a project we wanted to complete as a family, me and my sisters and my mother. And it was a thobe. It was a traditional Palestinian thobe. Of course, my mother is the main embroiderer, so we can't, like, you know, we don't want to take the credit. I mean, the dress is the garden's dress in the book. And I talk a lot about this story in the book for anyone who really wants a breakdown of it. But here, let me show you. These are sort of this is the traditional dress, front and back. So you can see it's quite a bit of embroidery. And, you know, we, for whatever reason, in today's like sort of culture of practicing embroidery, we are so focused on speed. Like, we have to get it done in a few months, or like it's like a college course or something. Yeah. This dress took us 11 years, and the last 2 years was in the apprenticeship program. It was like our sister. The garden's dress was like our sister. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So the traditional dress is wonderful and incredible, but I was also interested to see on your Instagram account that you also put traditional Palestinian embroidery on the back of a denim jacket, which is divinely beautiful and really cool, and a very contemporary way to express your own heritage. Let us, Wafa, get down to the nitty gritty. Can you describe to us the different parts of a trope?
Of a thobe?
Yeah.
So the thobe, so let me show you an example of one thobe. Of course, I'm wearing one that I made. This is a panel I just finished last month, and it's like my summer dress. I was like, okay, I'm gonna make a summer dress, so it's all like bright pink, and I don't know, anyways. But let me explain like something more traditional. So this is a dress from Hebron, and we think it's from like the 1930s or 1940s.
Wow.
Yeah. And yeah, I need to do a better job of hanging this up or something.
Oh.
But this is the sort of top portion. You can see that there are these striped silk inserts in the shoulders, which is really common. This silk came from Syria. There's many different stitches. There's like a running stitch. There's kind of a blanket stitch. We have all kinds of different stitches here. In the sleeves, you see various stitches as well as chiffon and like this sort of like hand-dyed linen kind of blue indigo kind of color. And the sleeves, like sometimes you see really narrow sleeves, but and you have to excuse me, you know, I live in Washington, D.C., right next to the Pentagon, and you hear like these aircrafts like hovering pretty low. So sometimes it's really loud because it's like security, you know, so I'm sorry for anyone who hears that. You know, America and their security. So then we've got like these sort of triangular sleeves. And traditionally, the way this was sort of handled, of course, this is a festive dress, but if someone had triangular sleeves on a more like everyday dress, they would take the bottom corners and tie them behind their neck to kind of pull back the sleeves so that they can work. Again, of course, in this dress, that's not the case. You see some zigzag sort of patchwork on the sleeves, but it also matches the sort of some various elements of zigzags even in the silk inserts here, and also on the patchwork on the sides. There's some like patchwork here on the sides, and I can stand up in a minute. So this is actually one of a genre of dresses where it's from El Khalil, but it's from the Wafa region. So the format of the chest design tells us that, and some other elements of the dress. There's this chest design format with the Road of Stars motif is part of this genre of dresses. So you know, there's many examples of this. A few people have posted recently about this El Khalili dress towards Wafa, like the villages towards Wafa. So that's interesting. And then, so that you have the sleeves, you have the silk inserts in the shoulders, you have the zigzags, then you also have this massive chest panel, and then you have a skirt. And the skirt can be constructed in many ways. Of course, you have to remember there's many different iterations of thobes in traditional Palestinian embroidery. But in the case of this El Khalili dress, you see these cut out patches almost in the center panel sewn on. And that's kind of, in some cases they have like tahriri, which is a couching stitch on top of the patchwork. In this case, the woman didn't do that. And then you've got a lot of cross stitch. And then here's the back side of the dress.
I think it's incredible, Wafa, how the cross stitch in the world of embroidery is actually a very relatively simple stitch, but it is taken here to the absolute extreme of complexity and density, and becomes such a rich design from a very, what is in fact a fairly simple stitch that a beginner could pick up, you know, the basic elements very quickly. Wafa, you are teaching a workshop for Selvedge, which we're very grateful for. That is going to be on Saturday the 15th and Saturday the 22nd of May. For that workshop, you've designed a special sampler. Could you tell us a little bit about this sampler, which has embroidery techniques from, I believe, 4 different regions? They're
motifs from 4 different regions. So the idea behind Palestinian embroidery is that it's not just a technique. Of course, there is a technique across all of Palestine. We really take care, this is the inside of the dress, and make sure that the back side of our embroidery is very clean and light and tight knit, and our tension is proper. We don't use hoops. So there is this art and science, of course, to the technique. But the motifs actually speak to a whole other side of Palestinian embroidery. And that's where actually my pen name or my book, Tatreez and Tea, came from. The Tatreez being this technique, the tea being symbolic of the storytelling traditions and the meanings behind the embroidery and the language of our embroidery. So I selected 4 motifs for this sampler. I designed the sampler just for Selvedge, just because I wanted something specific to this group. If I was going to be preparing the kits, I wanted it to be special. And I wanted to talk about the meanings of each of the motifs, because that's ultimately what I specialize in. Like, the region to region differentiation between the villages, sure, I know the differences, But I wouldn't say that's the part of Palestinian embroidery that I really focus on. I actually have a great passion for diaspora embroidery and like First Intifada embroidery and the embroidery that's been produced after 1948. But what I do specialize in is the language of the embroidery and what do each of the symbols mean, and then put together what stories do they tell. And I teach students how to take those motifs and tell their own stories. And that's ultimately, to me, the passing of this tradition beyond just this is how you stitch it. I also want to show how we tell stories. How do you document your own story in your embroidery and make sure that's passed on? These are all important parts of the Palestinian embroidery experience that is passed on to us from our mothers and our grandmothers. So it's quite a special experience for me to be able to share that.
That's fascinating. So I'm very interested in that you said we don't use hoops. So I think how could you do that? And I saw, I think on your Instagram, where you had almost sandwiched some canvas over the fabric, worked the embroidery, and then unpicked the canvas. Am I right?
Oh, like the waist canvas?
Yes.
Oh,
How exactly
yeah.
does that work? I've never seen that before.
Oh, yeah. So for the workshop, we're going to focus on Aida fabric. And Aida fabric is, do I have anything here? Aida fabric is this kind of like even weave kind of fabric that we're going to stitch on. And we don't use hoops. So we really focus on sort of trying to, part of the technique is knowing your tension and knowing how to work with your tension and everything. But on sort of a next level, I do teach waist canvas. So I have a denim jacket that's done, but this is my current in progress denim jacket. And this is what the waist canvas looks like. And you sew it on, you baste it, and there's a whole technique for it, depending on the motifs, and then you stitch. And once you're done stitching, you have to go in and remove it all. And actually my first job, when I was, a little girl, there's even pictures of me at 2 years old, was taking out the waist canvas for my mom. So I actually find a great deal of like calm and focus and meditation when I'm taking out waist canvas. So yeah, that's sort of a whole other level. Like, I'm working on like a chest design right now. You can see there's like I just work like this. Sometimes I'll clip it on something just so that the fabric is sort of sitting up more, but we don't use hoops. Yeah.
And I'm fascinated, absolutely fascinated. I hope that we have whet your appetite for all things embroidery. So as well as Wafa's workshop, which you can book tickets for online, we are holding a Selvedge social on Wednesday, the 9th of June, 2021. So far, so good. We have 3 different embroiderers. We have Rebecca Davney, who works in a French couture house doing fashion embroidery. We have Takashi Awakasi, who is a Japanese Canadian embroiderer who produces abstract design, and Pascal Montel, who is a French designer, who will each be talking about their own approach to embroidery. Tickets for that are also available on the Selvedge website. So I must thank you so much, Wafa, for joining us this afternoon. I really appreciate the wonderful insight we have had into Palestinian embroidery, and ask our listeners if you would like to join me again for the next IG Live. Tea and Textiles Talk will be on Friday, the 9th of April. I hope to see you all then. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye.